Well, g'day everyone. This is the dumbest design I've ever seen on a car in my life. Now, on the left, we've got an Ecotec. It's actually a VT, VS, whatever, thermostat housing. Now, you'll note that what we got here is a cutout. I'll show you what that cutout's for in a sec. This one here, no cutout. This is just, I haven't cleaned it up yet. This is off the supercharged L67 V6. See, there's no cutout. Let's bring that back into focus. Right. Now let me explain something. What you get is, I know this is roughly sort of focused and I know I'm in frame. What you get here is, this is the rubber seal that sort of, it goes around the thermostat. It's supposed to go around the thermostat, the edge of it. And anyway, there's no bleed system. So I've always wondered why, even with a coolant funnel, you open this bleeder, nothing happens. Like, you'll bleed up the radiator and all that kind of thing with a coolant funnel, and you know, the coolant funnel provides basically some pressure. You won't bleed up the actual engine block. The engine has its own bleeder, the block has its own bleeder, which is fine, but you can't get all the air out of it, especially if you're on a roadside. So, still in frame. This is just a generic, this is the same thermostat they use in just the Ecotec. Now what the Ecotec has is, in the block, there's a machined out, like a rebate, a recess, and the thermostat sits like that. If I can get, well, I can get it to stay there. If I can get it to stay there and get my mitts out of the way. Now, on the block itself, it actually has a little cutout. Now, what you'll notice, what you'll never notice, unless I try to zoom in without destroying everything, every shot. Focus. Right. This thing has a cutout for bleeding the cooling system. So if I move the thermostat, I'm new to using a tripod and a camera this way, but this is the Ecotec housing. The thermostat sits basically in the inlet manifold, and you've got this same looking cutout basically in the manifold itself. And this is there so that just the tiniest bit of coolant can bypass the thermostat even when it's closed to get the air out of the cooling system. Let's move to the L67 supercharged V6. This is continuous. There is no cutout whatsoever. We have a rubber seal. It goes in that way, obviously. So this is sealed to this housing. Is this in focus? Yep. It's close enough. Whatever, right? So there we go. It's sealed to this housing. Now, I'm 99% certain that there is a bleeder on this. There's actually a bleeder on this. You're never going to see it, I don't think. I'm trying to show it, but I can only just sort of see it myself sometimes. Where are we? If I get rid of this crap out of the background. You can't see it, but yeah, there you go. You can just see it. That's the bleeder for the L67. That's the bleeder. It's just the actual thermostat disc itself. That tiny little, I'm gonna say that's probably like a square millimeter hole. That is the bleeding system for this engine, and why an L67 is almost impossible to bleed. Well, if you don't have a coolant funnel, you can put in the radiator and basically fill to the top with coolant to get a pressure, a head of pressure in the cooling system. Undo the bleeder. You have to bleed it up in sequence, but you have to start the car and rev the crap out of it to actually bleed it. This is the reason why, because these cars don't have what the Ecotec V6 has. It needed this sort of design. if I can just get a close up. It needed this sort of design with the cutout so that when the thermostat's in place, you've got coolant bypassing the thermostat at all times. Now that's a decent sort of, I don't know, it's probably a 4mm hole. Now, just before anyone asks, I'll zoom back out again. And should we focus? Should we try to focus? I'm manually focusing, so you'll have to forgive me. This has been out in the backyard, by the way. Before you start asking, you can't just substitute A and B because look, they're different heights. I don't use the autofocus because it's absolutely rubbish. So as you can see, they're different heights. You can't just use A and B, they're different. But what I'm probably going to do, if we get this stuff out of the way without scratching my boot lid, and if we zoom back in and focus, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole in the rim of this thermostat. Not this one. This one's original to the car, by the way. I'm going to actually drill a hole. It's going to be in the rim, so if I turn the thermostat back round, it's going to come out basically just very close to the edge there. I don't have a pointer on me, but if I get rid of that seal, yeah, the holes, I'm not going to interfere with the thermostat itself, but I want to probably a 4mm hole, even a 3mm hole would do the trick. But I'm going to drill a hole there that rubber seal's not going to cover. So yeah, that's my modification, and I reckon that's going to make a massive difference to the way this cooling system bleeds up. Like, I think bleeding this thing up will be a 10-minute procedure rather than, like even with the coolant funnel and the book procedure, sometimes this thing just doesn't bleed. And part of the reason why is because if you've been working on it, this tiny little hole that you can't see, of course, I'd love to get I'll touch the lens, whoops. I'd love to get a close-up. This tiny little hole that you can't see, which is located there. Let's see if we can scratch the car more. That tiny little hole, which we're out of focus. Yeah, there we go. That tiny little hole is about a millimeter wide, and that's never going to bleed up in a million years if it fills with the smallest chunk of dirt. When I say dirt, I mean a tiny bit of corrosion from, say, the thermostat. I'm going to clean this off, I always do, but just imagine the tiniest bit of contaminant gets in that hole, you're not bleeding it up. So a hole that's like, you know, this sort of size, obviously the thermostat would cover it to about there. That's not going to block up very easily. So that's why L67s are a pig to bleed up and the Ecotechs aren't. In fact, when I work on an Ecotech, half the time, if I'm on the side of the road and I blow a hose or something and then, you know, cut the end of it and with a knife but basically screw it all back together, I don't even have to use the bleeder. If I haven't got a screwdriver, you know, and I've got a socket set that I use to do the hose clamp, I don't even undo the bleeder half the time. It'll still bleed up and work perfect.